All right. Hi, and welcome everyone. It is October the 28th, 2025. Hard to believe. And we are looking at a hot topic today in group and team coaching on neuroscience for learning, connection, and growth. In fact, today's call is really an offshoot of a 14-hour advanced coaching that we do for group and team coaches called NLEA, where we look at learning, experiential education, and neuroscience. And so this is a topic I like to geek out about once in a while. I have an undergrad degree in cognitive psych, sort of left psychology in the early 1990s, but have increasingly found my way back to it. I am a scientist by training. So when I get to talk science, it's always a good day. What we do here at Potentials Realized, if you've never heard about us, we are well known as groupcoachingessentials.ca. And part of what I like to say is the growth of the group and team coach never ends, whether you've been coaching for a year, whether you've been coaching for 2 decades. We continue to learn and learn and learn. And it's not always a direct path. So part of these calls is to really help you continue to build your skills. We have a very robust programming. I've got Ivana here, who is our team lead for group coaching. Some of you may have been with us for one or more of our pathway programs. We have a couple of things starting this week that I do want to spotlight, including our almost final group coaching essentials of the year. We have Flow Flex Scale 90 Days for those building their businesses, and we have our NELA group start this week. So we have alumni old and new. Want to welcome MH, and Steph Burke has just come into the room. Good to see you, Stephanie. The one thing that is on the docket that I want to invite everyone to, which is no cost, just your time, is the November writing sprints. And we kick off this Saturday, 8 a.m. Eastern. So a little later than last year, but it is going to be something I'm hosting every day for the month of November. Now, the times do rotate. I won't go into details. For those that are interested, either reach out to me or you can sign up, although we've seen that there is a Chrome constant contact interface issue. So if you're getting a 404 message when you click on the link, just email me at info@potentialsrealized.com and I'll add you to the list. It is a security issue from constant contact. So as we get started, let's bring you into the room. Love to work with visuals, metaphors, and we'll talk a little bit about why from a neuroscience standpoint. But so you think about your week this week and conversations. What is the image that would be useful to wrap your arms around? I want to give you just 1 minute to think about what is the image that's calling to you. I'll invite you to, if you have one, grab a pen and a piece of paper, sketch it out, and then we're going to open the floor for any quick discussion. But just take a minute. Literally, I'll start my timer on my phone today, not on the computer. I just want to bring you into the room to, number one, sort of re-regulate ourselves and also get some creative sparks going. All right, that is a minute. If you can believe it, you can keep on going. But just to bring you in, and I hope that this was fun and grounding. I chose something a little bit different. I'd love to see if anyone would be willing to share, but I will share because normally I pick my bridge. I love to bridge because I think that's very much what we do as group and team coaches is help people find the bridge from where they are to where they want to go. Today's call is about science, which I think is also another bridge on how do we activate learning, how do we activate insight, how do we help people move from the A to B. But I also chose two today, and I chose the a new image that I haven't had on many of our collage boards, which is the paper clips. Which I thought, why did I go for the paper clip? You know, there's one side that's very organized, probably not like Creative Gen, which is more the left. But I also then this message of like holding it together and finding the bridge was really important. And I think part of my mind right now. So it's the World Series week. I'm in north of Toronto. I'm a Torontonian, so it's a very exciting time. They played until 3 a.m. I, of course, went to bed at 11, like a good business owner would. But there's also another piece that's happening right now, which is like a Category 5 hurricane hitting Jamaica, literally as we speak. So I think I'm in this interesting space of like people holding it together, but also being very organized. And there's this interesting tension of collective joy, as a colleague and friend of mine said, who was at the Blue Jays game Friday night, but also just so many things happening. And so, how do I hold the space for both? That is really what I'm thinking about today. How do I hold the space for both? And polarities has seemed to be my fall 2025 theme. So I thought it was very fitting to pick these, two sets of different areas. So that's what I'm bringing today. Would anyone else like to share what they chose just as we get going? Because part of connection in a neuroscience way is to regulate together. And I think by having a shared experience, that really allows us to sync a little bit more. So, Steph, welcome back.
Thank you. I picked the picture of the mountains, and it very much reminds me of a view I saw this summer on the top of Mount Washington in New Hampshire. Um, and looking out from the summit at the top of the mountain at the view of all the surrounding mountains, which I believe all have presidential names. But so what came to mind was two things. One, I was standing on a summit. I reached the top of the mountain, and the reward is this amazing view of what's around you. Nature's magnificent. So
Mm.
I have been climbing a mountain for years, it seems, and I need to keep in my mind's eye the visualization of what it will look like when I reach the summit of that mountain and look out around me. Um, so that was one, and then the other is that each one of those mountains in that view has a summit and has hiking trails that people are climbing themselves to get to the top of those mountains and reach the summit. So, from a perspective of creating a business, there's just this landscape out there where others are also doing what I'm doing in different fashion. So, so that was my thought.
I love how that ended with like you're on a summit, the colleagues are on another summit, and isn't it interesting when our pathways cross too, right? Like I think there's something about that interesting journey and quest. And as I think about 2025, for some of you listening, or like Steph, I think you were with us maybe in February when we did the sticky learning. I was in Barbados leading that workshop, but it's really been a year, I think, in my work with organizations, with entrepreneurs, with groups, with teams, to really be about the quest. Like, and where are we on the quest? So thanks for the reminder that, you know what? We may be at a certain point. We may be at the top, but we may also be not quite there yet. And how do we keep going? What do we do to resource ourselves? How do we remind ourselves of what's at the end or what's at that next milestone marker of the journey? Because I'm not sure if I know for me in this business, like there's always summit after summit after summit, which is why I like that you chose the multiple mountains stuff. Excellent. Anyone else before we dive into like some neuroscience? Okay, so let's go. And writing sprints are coming up. I talked about that. Would also like to spotlight a quick article I did on LinkedIn, and it really is 5 reasons why play is essential for organizations and team performance today. Just went up a few days ago, and you'll see part of this. I did want to bring back our usual focus on metaphor, on visuals, because there's something that does happen in the brain. So let's get into it. I would also say with Ivana and I, we did episode 35 at the Coaching Many podcast on neuroscience and group and team coaching. And I think it is another addition to this. This is a little bit more experiential. That's a little bit more illustratory. And then we get into the content in our 14 CCE program. So check that one out, episode 35 of the Coaching Many podcast, which you can find on your different podcast players. So why am I even talking about this? Why does it matter? And so really wanted to frame this as we are in an era of ongoing change, right? There's a lot of disruption. There's a lot of ongoing change that can do some really interesting things to our bodies. Neuroscience and our ability to work with the brain leads us to that flow and that flex that allows us to really scale and grow, continue to grow our businesses against all backdrops. So today I'm drawing on another triad. Many of you have heard me speak about the triad of trust, safety, connection. In our NLEA program, we really dive into not only neuroscience, but learning, which is a little bit different, and this whole notion of the experiential process. So a couple of things to level set. I love reading and hearing David Rock, who is so well known in his neuro leadership. Along with Schwartz, they had a great quote: learning is change at the level of neurons. Learning is the change at the level of neurons. And many of you will be familiar with this notion of neural learning, which is really what fires together, wires together. Why do we remember things? Because part of our brain is firing and getting stronger. That's one layer to this, but really, as coaches, it's not just about having good conversation. It is understanding how we learn, how we connect, and how the brain changes. This allows us as coaches to design more effective group and team experiences, whether it's pure coaching, whether it's a retreat, whether it's a online learning. I would really assert that there's probably something here today that's going to help you design better, because we need to be intentional with our learning design. So a couple of things to keep in mind, and this is going to be much more of a survey call. We could do a whole year of neuroscience calls and not even hit the marker. I actually, in later this week, I'm going to be sitting down with Dr. Arena. I can't remember Arena's last name, but she has an award-winning podcast for coaches, the Neuroscience of Coaching podcast. And Arena and I met earlier this month. We were both keynoting at the ICF Atlantic Halifax conference. And she's like, Jen, I want you to come and talk on my podcast. I'm like, I'd love to. So we're going to be talking about team flow. And so that's a very specific area. I just highlight it because I think flow is a really big part of our work. It's in the Flow Flex scale model for business development. As a strengths-based coach, it's all about helping people get into flow. But neuroscience is not just flow. So that's where today we're going to take it a little bit bigger. Some other things that you'll want to keep in mind: terms like dopamine. It's a neurotransmitter in our brain. And this is what drives creativity, curiosity, insight, and retention. So how do we do it? Well, there's a lot of ways that we can activate dopamine. For those of you that have been with us for any of our challenges, and I may bring it in for next month. I'm not quite sure if it will happen with the writing sprints, but if you've been with me for our online learning with Experiential, you'll recognize the dopamine buttons. And in Experiential, which is an online learning portal, every time someone completes a milestone, it could be watching a video, it could be doing a quiz, you actually get a dopamine hit through a little celebration. There's often a cheer, there's like a graphic, and it's like, you did it. And that might sound very small, but in today's world, our brains are looking all the time for these dopamine hits. many of the clients that we work with might have grown up in the age of video games, right? I think about my experience as a kid, right? I had an Atari. My son is a gamer. He has like every other device, but I watch him, right? And it's so interesting to see how his brain is really wired for that dopamine hit. He'll get into his zone, and we all summer long we were driving, and he'd be like do, 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 on his little device. He couldn't hear me at all. So how do we get in touch with our clients, right? To coach a person like him, Gen Z, is very different than coaching a Gen Xer. So I offer this really, there's multiple layers to this. For us, one thing we always want to be doing to also activate and stimulate dopamine is looking at how do people generate insights. So as a coach practice, how are we using our questions to link new ideas to experiences? I think part of my imprint before doing this was really thinking about the bridge. And there is a bridge to dopamine. Part of the bridge to dopamine is really having people make those connections, see how A does lead to B. And how do we do it as coaches? We simply ask the question. So really be thinking about that. It's a little piece, but it's a big piece. And if you're looking around this week, my guess is you're now going to start hearing more about dopamine. It's a major, major neurotransmitter that social media has hooked on to, literally. Because if you look at the way social platforms are built, it's all about dopamine hits. So if that is the context in which we operate, right, with TikTok, with Facebook, it's the likes, it's the shares. How do we also change the way we actually work our conversations so that it can incorporate some dopamine? This is always choice, but it's available to you as coaches. So different area. And maybe before I move on, any other thoughts on dopamine? Is this something you've heard about before? Ivana's like saying, yeah. So Ivana, what's your take forward from dopamine?
Jen, I have to say, I never thought about this, but I actually brought this back from Canada in the summer, and I'm sure many of you see it. It's the easy button, right? And so it's something that I use with clients, but it's also something that I use with myself to like celebrate those small little wins, right? It's like those things, those procrastinators. So to me, I'm like, I get a little dopamine hit every time I hit this little button to go, hey girl, you did it. Hey, that was easy. And so it's like, yeah, you can do more, you can do more. And I'm like, this is actually a tool that I have been using without giving it intentionality around the dopamine, because it's also, and I know part of the program we talk about motivation, which I'm not going to steal your fire, but it's like how can we? And I'm actually, as you were typing, I'm like, yeah, what are the ways I actually activate dopamine in my groups, in my one-on-ones, and how can I double down on that?
It's a little thing, but you might think, oh, that's just too much. But we do have younger generations that have come up that really this is part of their motivational structure. And if we're not motivated, right, we're not going to focus. If we're not motivated, we're not going to change. Steph, what is this?
I think, with the all the social media and all the dopamine hits that the younger generation and anybody who's addicted to social media gets, there's actually a dopamine addiction.
Yeah,
And when people are in situations and they're not getting content or anything that stimulates their dopamine, they become incredibly disengaged and distracted. And um, so it's definitely something we need to incorporate into our work. Otherwise, we become um, non-effective just because we're not stimulating their brain.
yeah. And so it says here curiosity, right? Like I think one area, one sort of on-ramp can also be how do we help people be curious? And part of curiosity can also be with pattern interruption, right? Like we use a lot of the dice, right? It could be photographs, but that's just something different that people will get jolted by. So again, that's one layer. Total different other layer I want to take us to is social brain, right? And part of why we And part of why I'm a real advocate for group coaching is because I do believe that most of us at some level are wired to really learn in connection with others, to learn in contrast to each other. Now that's up for debate, but that's certainly our philosophy here at Potentials Realized, and there is a whole science behind it. So some of you may have heard me talk about a Canadian psychologist, Arthur Bandura, who was very active in the late 60s, early 70s. When I went through McGill studies as a psychologist, we learned all about this notion. I think part of it was like this imprint. I don't remember his studies, although I remember some, but I do remember just really thinking about, how do I learn as a young professional? What is the context in which I want to create? And this was like before I was really leading teams in high pressure, high stakes contexts. I knew the science, but I didn't know the practice. And so what I think is really interesting and what I want to bring here is like, how has our practice also been underpinned by some pretty seminal things like back to David Rock. He talks about the SCARF model, which is all about motivation. How are we motivated? By status, by certainty, by autonomy, the ability to do things, by relatedness, and by fairness. So that's a pretty seminal model. Many coaching models actually incorporate this, but part of the practicality is if we're not feeling certain, if we're not feeling connected or related to others, we're not going to have our safety and trust and quote unquote belonging activated. So, part of what I've been talking about for a decade now with the triad of trust, safety, connection goes back to some of this initial framing from David Rock and others on SCARF. The interesting thing is each one of us is going to be motivated by different things. We're going to have as our baseline a different thing. And so as a group coach, it's important to really get to know your members and really have group members understand and get to know each other as well to build that trust and safety. It's not just enough to have with the coach. We need to build it in that collaborative space. Part of setting people up for success is also getting people grounded, right? Whether you do something creative like we did with the images or whether it's a simple check-in. I was working with a group yesterday, week 4 of a 5-week touch point, and very much the question was, what have you been percolating on? A lot's been happening and they're in an organization. A lot's been happening in their organization. So it was really interesting. And we spent a good 30 minutes in the check-in. For some group coaches, it's like, whoa, isn't that a little long? Well, maybe for a public group, but for a corporate group, really important for them to hear from each other, to get connected and to have their brains sync. And I think maybe all of us at some point in our life have maybe been part of a team or an organization. It could be a sports team where we really have synced. As some of you know, I was a synchronized swimmer for many, many years throughout my entire high school career. I was also a rower. And I always said, like in the winter, I'd swim. In the fall and winter, I'd swim. And then in the spring and summer, I'd row. Very team-based context, right? Like synchronized swimming. It's like it's not just go and have fun in the pool. It's like a real competitive sport. Same with rowing. If you're not syncing as a team, as a 4 or an 8, you are not going to be able to row. You'll literally catch a crab, as they call it. You won't actually be able to move the boat. And so I've always been fascinated by like what happens in these high intensity environments. I actually always thought that teams were meant to be high intensity until I was probably about 30 years old. And we would see, whether it was those teams or the teams that I led through the Amazon and South America, we would see very quickly like synchronization, biological synchronization, emotional synchronization. And while I'm saying that is highly intense environments, I think we do see synchronization in group coaching as well, when people are really connected. So that can be a positive. It can also be something to watch out for as well, because we do want to avoid a group think. People learn in contrast, right? If we're all too similar, we may not be stretching the realm of how we can learn. But social brain is definitely something to be thinking about. So pause here. Comments, questions. Have you got examples or experiences where you've really seen how interconnection has transformed experiences? Pretty big question. Steph?
I have an example of the opposite, right?
Okay.
I worked in a company that was having severe financial difficulties, and the people did not feel safe,
Mhm.
and trust was deteriorating, and even, and it affected the culture of the whole company because that these elements were lacking. Um, it's kind of like the flip side. When they're missing, everything falls apart.
And I think it's a really good reminder too, why do coaches get activated, right? Coaches are rarely activated to just make a great team better. Maybe in good times, yeah, but in real times, it's like we've got this issue. We've got a multi-million-dollar issue at play. And so again, it's these small incremental elements that really help us build, rebuild, but also erode trust. There's always a counterpoint to it. I think many of you have heard me share this fall that there was a great Choice magazine edition that was just released in early October called Trust. So if you've never heard of Choice magazine, it is a journal for professional coaching, comes out of Toronto. And the whole edition is dedicated to trust. So I've got an article in there called Micro Moments, Macro Shifts. And what it introduces, I didn't bring it into this, but I should have, because it really introduces or reintroduces the pause, focus, create, activate framework of what we teach in the Conversation Sparker frame. And it builds trust, right? What is so interesting is I never shared that framework with this group yesterday. And they were like, we know that it's good to apply, but what about like how else can you apply? And I said, well, could you just activate it? And they're like, oh my gosh, that's more. And it's like, yeah, even our languaging around how we help leaders move to application. Like, is application enough, or do we really need to have people activate? I would assert we got to activate. And that's why our superpower course is known as Activate Your Group and Coaching, your group and team coaching superpowers, to help coaches not just apply the learning, but it's about the being, it's about the whole embodiment and activation of things. And that's where neuroscience, right? Yes, it is the brain, but it's also the learning and it's the creation of experiences that we have at our disposal. So one more area we've done at dopamine, attention and engagement. Steph, you just mentioned this, right? Like the needle is not moving on engagement in organizations. MH, I know you've worked in a lot of organizations as well. We're very attuned to this. We try to keep moving the needle. Well, according to neuroscientists, one area we may look at is managing our cognitive load. And of course, our prefrontal cortex is where we retain a lot of our memory. It holds limited information. Again, the metaphor I was taught on is imagine a file drawer. You open the brain, you open the file drawer. Is it full or is it empty? How much room is there? Well, we know from recent years, everything from Zoom calls to adding cognitive load to overwhelm, adding cognitive load. How do we clear space? And so, again, interesting research out, variety and movement. This summer, like I do every summer, I have a couple of days that I spend writing, part of this 72-hour writing marathon. Day one, morning one, they bring in a barefoot walking specialist. And we literally walk for an hour through the woods, through the water, just getting back in touch with our body. Now, I'm not a barefoot walking specialist, but this year I really listened. Her name is Sue Kenny. And I really listened to Sue and I said, Sue, give us the science behind this barefoot walking. This is what she's been doing for 20 years. So she like spouts off all these things. Like what really captured my attention was the fact that there's just as many neurotransmitters in our feet as there are in our hands. But what do? We walk around with shoes on all day long, right? We've sort of desensitized it. I don't know, like 5, 6 years of seeing Sue first morning of the writing marathon always gets me going. So much so that I got 2 awards this year for most prolific and most time with bum and chair because I was so inspired by my book. And I think it was because of Sue and taking us out into the realm. I would also say I am now the tradition of day 3. So I get to bring, based on the writer's experiences, I now get to bring the conversation sparkers every third morning in the final hall, which speaks to metaphor. So a couple of things that we might do and experiment with is change your modalities. Okay. You've heard me say the 7 to 10 minutes. It could be 10 to 15 minutes, but how are you helping people reset, do things differently? And the reset could be write it down. It could be, here's a brain teaser. Here's like, some images. It could be, let's get up and move around. Our cognitive capacity is declining, especially with AI. That's a whole other beast that I didn't bring into today. But initial studies, 2025 fall, is showing that if we're not using our critical thinking, it's eroding very, very quickly. So again, think about how we're activating prefrontal cortex. It can only hold limited information, but are we using it wisely? And the final one I wanted to leave with is emotional brain. And really good metaphor here. Emotion is like Velcro for memory, because we remember things that have emotional connection for us. So emotion strengthens recall. It also strengthens meaning making. Story and metaphor, which I had you do earlier today, activates deeper brain regions, right? It's not your surface, it's deeper. And that may be why, not is, but maybe why we remember things a little bit differently after the call. So coach practice could be invite personal stories, activate metaphors. And that's why we have our spark of charms, the cards, or the dice. They're really optimal for activating this Velcro. So 4 different areas. Just wanted to bring these to you today, whether it's looking at Velcro, whether it's looking at attention and engagement, whether it's looking at the learning brain, right, dopamine, or whether it's looking at the social brain. So really 4 areas. Again, social brain with connection, thinking about connectivity, thinking about synchrony, as we call it. How do you synchronize together? Learning with curiosity and dopamine. Attention and management, looking at cognitive load. How are you clearing the filing cabinet? That can be through movement, right? It resets our brain. And then the emotional piece, equaling Velcro. So I'm curious, out of these 4, what is one that you might want to do a little bit more exploration around, whether it's learning about or even experimenting in your own work? An experiment could be as simple as taking a week and saying, this week I'm going to notice what happens with engagement. Or this week I'm going to bring in more somatic approaches so that we are activating more movement. Maybe it'll have an impact on engagement. I can stop my share and just bring all of you up on the screen. What do you want to experiment with this week?
I think I want to experiment with dopamine. I've been using ChatGPT a lot, and I've noticed that ChatGPT, this is making me realize that ChatGPT always begins a response by, "What a thoughtful question," or "That's very insightful of you to say." And I'm realizing that that must be by design. This is ChatGPT hitting me with some dopamine, prompting dopamine so that I will want to come back to it and spark my curiosity to ask more questions. And so first I want to hold that awareness, and second I want to think about, how do I bring more of that into my life and around me? How can I send those positive signals more regularly, but coming from an authentic place, not as a computer?
Not as a computer. And you'll also maybe notice something for those that have been on ChatGPT for a while. Has anyone else noticed a bit more of a pause before it responds? So they've actually been doing studies around people trusting ChatGPT And some of the distrust that people were building, there was a hypothesis that actually it was because there was not enough of a pause between question and response. So I've noticed in the last couple of weeks, maybe months, that there's a bit of a more analyzing, analyzing, and then it responds.
Mm.
There's a lot of science, right? And remember, science can be used for many, many purposes. I remember being trained as a scientist and seeing how it's been a world changer on both the positive and the negative. Chat GPT is a massive disruptor. I'm not saying I think there's flip sides to everything. It allows me as a writer to do better research, quicker research, but I also, like your point, need to notice what's really happening to my brain. And am I like becoming dependent when I could be doing the thinking myself? Because early studies are showing atrophy and critical education atrophy, which is not a good thing. Steph, how about you? Maybe you take us to a different area. What do you want to experiment with this week?
So the social brain. In my day job, we are getting a huge influx of new candidates. And I just heard Amazon laid off 30,000 people. So there's a couple, and they're a client of LHH who I work with. So anyway, we've encouraged to do group sessions, which I tried and faltered, and I've got to get back to that. So the scarf model is definitely what people need who are in this, in the new phase of being let go, the social connecting, knowing they're not the only ones, knowing that, there's this group of people they can connect with and find relatedness with in their situation. So it reinforces to me that group coaching sessions for people in job transition can be powerful just because of the scarf model alone, right? So without all those other elements which support them too. So that's what I'd take away.
Love it. Pick one. And there's a really good white paper that David Rock did years ago on the scarf model. If you want more info, just Google it and you'll probably find it. And Ivana, what about you? What's your take on this one? We've got you on mute.
Steph took mine because I was like, scarf model. I wanted to revisit that. So that was something that was really interesting for me. Really interesting because there's something I completely missed any and all conversations about the scarf model, apparently. So I need to go and explore that. So I was already on Google with the white paper.
So what I'm going to focus on to this point is Velcro. How do I make sure that everything we create, whether it's a book, whether it's a webinar like this, is sticky, right? Is more Velcro oriented. And as most of you know, two things that I'm really focusing on this fall. Number one, for entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, because what will happen to those, say, 30,000 people who are laid off? They're probably going to go and reorient themselves into solopreneurship, right? That is going to be, I think, a massive pathway for so many people. And Flow Flex Scale is what Steph has seen in the Coaching Biz Growth Lab. It's a recombination of taking all these different areas that no one could ever remember, putting it in a package of flow, flex, and scale so that you can really create your next, if people want to go and be an entrepreneur, which I think still is a choice, it's not a necessity, but it's, certainly a viable path. So I'm going to think about it in that way. Later today, I find out if it's been accepted by a publisher. So hold good thoughts. If it's not, I'll take it to more publishers because I think it's one of those ones that needs to get out in a very big way. But the second area that I'm finding myself doing a lot of work around is, of course, experience design. And like, how do we design for better experiences across the board? So I hope you've had fun. Thank you for taking time today. We're back next week. My brain is blank on the actual topic, but November, it's going to be November 4th and the 18th.
Creativity.
Creativity. So yeah.
Jen, it's about journaling, creativity.
And
That's
writing,
next week's
because next
session.
month is all
And
about
writing.
writing as well. So we actually will have 3 calls in the month
Yeah.
of November. The 4th was writing. The 11th is not published, but that's going to be a date. So save the date. And that will probably be either our 2026 vision casting session. If you can believe it, we're at that time of year. Or it may be a panel. And then the 18th, Ivana, do you have the 18th up? What is the 18th?
Yeah, the 18th, I believe it's opening up, but it's on somatic approaches.
Somatic approaches. So all of these are on Tuesdays, 12 to 12:30, 45-ish, as we've gone today.
So 11:11 was the vision.
11:11 is probably going to be vision, yeah.
That is so good.
It's yeah, so MH, you haven't been to it, but I do a series of reflective prompts to help people envision their next year. And save the date, either the 2nd or 3rd Tuesday, 12 noon of December, will be our 22nd annual holiday party and year-end celebration. So join us for that one. A date still to be continued, to be confirmed. The only debate is my son who wants to go away. And he is coming home on the 14th of December. So I got to look at flights, but it'll be either 2nd or 3rd December, Tuesday of December. So that's it. Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you on Saturday, November 1st at 8 a.m. to write in this regular Zoom room. Will you join us, Steph?
Yes, I plan to. Yep, absolutely.
I love it. Okay, so we have like everyone here is going to be there. So let's do it. The month of November, whatever you want to write, just show up and you can write. And we'll see you. Have a great
Thank you.
day.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
My pleasure.
Wonderful.
Bye.